attacking the Iranian embassy in Damascus. If any other country had done that to any other country's embassy, the United States and its allies would have surely condemned that country. I mean, could you imagine if the Russians had hit an embassy in any country around the world? The United States and its allies would have gone ballistic. But with Israel, as always, it's a different story. The Israelis can do pretty much anything they want and get away with it. Tells you something about Israel's ability to pretty much do anything it wants in international politics and get away with it because the United States will protect it. One cannot see a happy ending to that conflict. They also have an ongoing conflict with Hezbollah on their northern border, which is not going well. And there doesn't appear to be any end to that one either. And then if you look at what's happening inside Israel itself, where there are all sorts of protests and disagreements of one sort or another. To put it more bluntly, there are a lot of centrifugal forces at play inside of Israel. Within Israel itself, there's not wide differences of opinion among most people on how this war should be conducted. This is why the argument that if you get rid of Benjamin Netanyahu, all things are going to change and we're going to live happily ever after make no sense. It really doesn't matter whether you get rid of Netanyahu and replace him with Benny Gantz or Naftali Bennett. The end result will be the same. There are large numbers of progressives, large numbers of young people, and the Arab American community in the United States that is deeply disturbed by what Biden is doing with regard to Gaza. He has to placate the Israel lobby and Israel's supporters in the United States. And at the same time, he wants to try to placate Arab Americans and progressives who might vote against him. What was going on here is, again, Biden was trying to appeal to both sides. When he said it was non-binding, he was appealing to the Israeli side. By abstaining and letting the resolution go through the Security Council, he was appealing to progressives and to the Arab American community. And the question is, do you think that this is going to work? And my answer is no. There is no fix. If he sides with the Israelis, clearly, then he's going to alienate progressives and Arab Americans and others, and this is going to cause him to lose in all likelihood in the fall. If, on the other hand, he sides with the progressives and with the Arab Americans against the Israelis, this will enrage the Israel lobby and Israel's supporters in the United States, and he's likely to lose in November because he alienated those institutions and individuals. Furthermore, 50% of the people who voted for Joe Biden in 2020, this is 50%, believe that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. So Biden has a huge problem here because he is supporting the Israelis almost completely. It's quite clear to me that Putin was deeply committed to making Minsk work. He wanted to solve the problem in the Donbass diplomatically through Minsk. What has happened subsequently is that his interlocutors, Angela Merkel, for example, the French leader, Hollande, and Poroshenko, who was the Ukrainian leader at the time, all three of them, those were his three interlocutors, have admitted that they did not take the Minsk process seriously, and what they were doing was stalling for time so that the West could arm and train Ukraine. In other words, they bamboozled Putin. And Putin, who argued in good faith, is needless to say furious about what happened. Now, this story doesn't play very well in the West these days, so you can rest assured that in the West, the spinmeisters will go to great lengths to tell a different story, and they will try to blame Putin for what happened, and they will come up with all sorts of excuses for why Angela Merkel and the others are really not telling the truth, and it was really Putin who undermined the whole process. I mean, this is the way the game is played these days. The Russians, given the way events are moving, are likely to win this war. And what the Biden administration naturally wants to do is everything possible to prevent that from happening. So I think at this point in time, what the administration, the Biden administration is focusing on, and what NATO is focusing on, is just stemming the tide, making sure that the Russians don't roll over the Ukrainians. Because the longer the war goes on, the more there will be more Ukrainians who die, and Ukraine will lose more territory. I believe it's in Ukraine's interest to try to shut the war down immediately and preserve as much of the territory that they now control as possible and minimize the number of Ukrainians killed moving forward. There can be no more arms transfers. There can be no more aid from the United States to Ukraine. That relationship has to be completely severed. And again, Ukraine has to become a neutral country. And the sooner this is done, the better. But of course, I think there is very little chance that Ukraine will do that, and the West will agree to push Ukraine down that road. Why did we start this war to begin with? Why did we push NATO expansion into Ukraine when the Russians made it clear that they viewed it as an existential threat? And if we didn't stop it, would lead to war. That was manifestly clear for years. And nevertheless, at every turn, we doubled down. And in late 2021, early 2022, when it looked like a war was about to happen, and the Russians actually made an attempt to solve it diplomatically in December of 2021, we basically told them we weren't interested, and we allowed the war to happen. We're not moving now to push Ukraine to become neutral is hardly surprising, given how foolishly we have behaved in the past. We, of course, meaning the West here, and that includes the United States. Up until 2014, for sure, maybe even up until the war broke out in February of 2022, we thought that we could shove NATO expansion into Ukraine down the Russians' throat. You want to remember that we had two big tranches of NATO expansion before the whole Ukraine fiasco. One was in 1999, that's when Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic came in. And then we had another big expansion in 2004. War was going to break out. I think we came to the conclusion that we could beat the Russians. I think this is why we told the Ukrainians to walk away from the negotiating table in Istanbul in March, April of 2022, right after the war started. We thought we could beat the Russians. We had a theory of victory. Of course, that theory of victory was fundamentally flawed, and things have not turned out the way that we believed that they would turn out. I think almost everybody at this point in time understands that Ukraine could collapse and end up as a dysfunctional rump state, and the Russians could end up controlling. The leaders in Washington who are celebrating the 75th anniversary of NATO are going to want to go to great lengths to downplay what's happening in Ukraine and celebrate the alliance and talk about its wonderful future. So you won't be hearing much discussion of just how desperate things are. We'll tell them in no uncertain terms that that is not possible. And the Germans will do the same. And I think there'll be significant resistance within France itself if Macron tries to do that. You were talking before about the possibility of the West using nuclear weapons to defend Ukraine should the Russians win. I think that's extremely unlikely. I think that the United States is not going to initiate nuclear use. I don't even think we're going to think seriously about that possibility. And again, I don't think we're going to send in troops either. I think that we will just have to accept the fact that we lost. Even if we get a frozen conflict, I think what's likely to happen here is that you're likely to have an intense security competition between Ukraine and the West on one side and Russia on the other side for the foreseeable future. And the potential for escalation in this competition, this nasty competition, will be significant. They're not going to be interested in hearing your views. There will be, occasions where you slip through the iron wall and you get to make your case, but those occasions will be few. And anybody who challenges that dominant view is going to be attacked and is going to be frozen out. The fact that we in the West have in effect shut down the marketplace of ideas when it comes to talking about Ukraine has led to all sorts of trouble. I think if we had had a more open debate about Ukraine and the idea of bringing Ukraine into NATO after 2014, that we might have been able to head this problem off. But after 2014, when the crisis broke out, that was February 2014, it became very difficult for people with my view to be heard. And on those occasions when they were heard, they were basically smeared as Putin's puppets or apologists for Russian behavior or what have you.